Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We take a lot of your questions, but a lot of them today pointed at Omar Khan and the legacy he's trying to build as the Steelers GM. We'll talk about that and answer more of your questions here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. All right, Steelers fans, it's Monday. We're back here. Minicamp. Not even minicamp. OTAs. There's too many offseason things. OTAs starts next week with the Steelers. I believe Tuesday through Thursday are those days. We will be there on hand to cover them. But we are going to be still talking about a lot of things here. There's rumors that Aaron Rodgers might be coming to the Steelers before the end of the month. We will see. But as always, I've been telling you guys, you can always call in with your questions. And as I've told you, I've been really backed up with, having to cover rookie camp. We had the draft, and then we had all sorts of things going on. The schedule release, all that stuff was going on. But as always, you can call in with your number at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. You can call to get your question answered on the show. So we're going to go through a lot of calls in this show. We still have a ton to work through. If I did 10 calls a show, I think it would still take me like over a week to finish catching up with you guys. So I thank you to everyone who calls, and keep calling if you have questions. And if you haven't heard yours yet, trust it's either, I'm just stacked up, or we're going to get to it. We're going to do our best to get to it throughout the summer. But I wanted to lead this off because I thought there were a lot of good and relevant questions about Omar Khan that you guys have been asking. So let's start this one off with James in Rochester, New York, asking about Omar Khan and whether he's on a mission right now to clear out guys that Kevin Colbert drafted. Here's James.
Hi, Chris. This is James from Rochester, New York. And just a quick question. I listened to the emergency podcast and kind of syncing it all in with what's going on with George Pickens. And the thought kind of rang through me, and I don't mean to sound probably rude about it, but do you think the Steelers and Omar Khan is kind of just cleaning house of anything that was part of the Kevin Colbert era? And I think that Omar was seeing the potential of Pickens not being part of the bigger plan, and decided to get the compensation that he thought he could get. Just want to know your thoughts. Thank you very much. Really enjoy listening to the show every morning and listening to probably the great show that it is. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, James, for calling in. As always, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. We'll try to answer your question like I'm about to do for James here. So, James, good question, because when you think about it, in the past couple seasons, the Steelers have been clearing out the late top picks of Kevin Colbert. You think about trading away Kenny Pickett to the Eagles. You think about not signing Najee Harris this past offseason, or signing him to a fifth-year extension a year ago, and now he's with the Chargers. And now you see them trading away George Pickens, and you think like, wow, those were supposed to be the big trio that Kevin Colbert was going to leave behind offensively. And so, look, I do think that Omar Khan is on a mission to clear out the roster, but I don't think it's about Kevin Colbert's picks, because here's why. If it was, why not get rid of Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Minkah Fitzpatrick? And I'm not saying that you're saying that they should do that, but I think it's because they're getting rid of the guys they know aren't. You hit it in your question. They're getting rid of the guys that aren't part of the bigger picture that they want moving forward. Now, again, Kevin Colbert did not have a great final several years in the draft. After 2017, which, I mean, when you kind of look back at it, he really hit out the park. TJ Watt, Juju Smith-Schuster, who, had he not gotten injured, maybe he'd be a lot better of a player too. Cam Sutton was good, very good for the time that he was with the Steelers before he went to the Lions. James Conner, even Josh Dobbs is a fourth-round pick. That was just an awesome draft. But you look at 2018, Terrell Edmonds, James Washington, Mason Rudolph, Chuks Okorafor, Devin Bush. In 2019, Devin Bush, Deontay Johnson, Justin Lane, Benny Snell. 2020, Chase Claypool. He did get Alex Highsmith, and that has worked out. But Anthony McFarland, Kevin Dotson, you look at it, and they've had quite a few misses. But at the same time, they also signed Pat Freiermuth. It's another guy that Omar Khan kept around. And I think the reason they signed Pat Freiermuth is because he fits their long-term plans, because he's a guy who they want to have around, because he's a guy who does have leadership qualities and is also a playmaker, and they see him being about the team, and that's what they ultimately want here. And I think what you look at with some of these guys, especially when you think about Kenny Pickett and how, when Mason Rudolph started to make plays at the end of the season, he was asked in the locker room, and I was there for this, when he was asked, did you learn anything from watching Mason Rudolph after that first Bengals game that Mason Rudolph won? Kenny Pickett said no, and that was it. And after that, there were some obvious tensions there. And then you have George Pickens over the past 2 years, where he didn't throw blocks for teammates at times, and then there were questions about his attitude, and then he was showing up late for things. All those things, have played into it. Najee Harris, I don't think Najee Harris had those problems as much, but I think that he wasn't part of the long-term plan when you look at how the Steelers were building. I still say they could have kept him around for at least one more year with that fifth-year extension, and it wouldn't have. That's because $6.7 million for a year for a running back is not that expensive. But at the same time, when you're saying, hey, we're going to take advantage of this draft class that's really deep at running back, and you get a guy like Kaleb Johnson, who I really like, that makes sense because Kaleb Johnson's even cheaper. So, I think it's more so about keeping the guys they do think are part of the long-term plan, and less about trying to just clear out everyone associated with Kevin Colbert. But I do think it is about acknowledging, hey, we have whiffed in some drafts here. So instead of trying to pretend like we didn't, let's make moves and try to rebuild. Now, we still have to see if Omar Khan's picks pan out, right? Because Broderick Jones has been a starter for 2 years, 1.5 years, and he's been good some days, really bad some others, and he still has to put it together consistently. Joey Porter Jr. has shown the potentials of being a shutdown quarterback, but he's also shown a ton of times where he makes unnecessary errors and commits penalties when he doesn't need to. Keanu Benton has shown some promise as a guy that could deliver as a defensive tackle, but he's also gotten bullied off the line in double teams and has to get better at that. But you got, guys like Darnell Washington, Nick Herbig. You're waiting to see if Corey Trice can develop. You still need to see if Troy Fautanu can even play. Zach Frazier looked good as a rookie. Can he build upon that in year two? Roman Wilson never played. Peyton Wilson looked really good. Mason McCormick looked really good. There's some positive things with some of the guys that Omar Khan's brought in, but ultimately you have to see them develop still before you ultimately cast judgment on them. Still, to your point, I don't think it's about clearing out Kevin Colbert's picks. I think it's about clearing out just the picks that weren't working of late. And if the fact that they are Kevin Colbert's picks, I think that's part of the equation, because naturally that's his predecessor. But again, I wouldn't say that they're trying to do that across the board, because they're keeping several of Kevin Colbert's picks. Now, if after this show the Steelers start making a whole bunch of trades and they start selling guys away, then we'll know different, right? But I highly doubt that's going to happen, because it's clear they want the nucleus that they've been building to stay intact and to, in fact, grow stronger. And I think what they want to do is they want to bring younger guys in who will buy into the type of nucleus that they have and build it out on their own moving forward. That's what good organizations do. They make sure that when a torch is lit in your locker room that embodies the leadership and the culture that you want, that you have young people coming in who will take the torch from the old guys. That's what's happened with the Steelers defense over the years. When you think of guys like Casey Hampton and James Ferrier and Troy Polamalu and how they passed it down to Cam Hayward and that crew, and Cam Hayward, along came TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick, and they've done it. Now, can someone take the torch from them in the next several years? That's going to be the next question. But in the offense, there was Hines Ward kind of lit the torch for a while. And then, eventually Ben Roethlisberger came around, and then they had Pouncey, DeCastro, and those guys. But over time, those guys never got their torchbearers. The offensive line didn't get built. The offensive line's replacements were not built when Pouncey and DeCastro both retired early. The Steelers didn't get a quarterback that was going to be the future guy when Roethlisberger was still around. And Antonio Brown went crazy and left the team, and they kind of had to just rebuild that anyway. So they kind of missed the boat there on offense as far as passing that torch down. They didn't on defense, but that's the key here. It's not necessarily about getting rid of guys that were just Colbert picks. It's getting rid of the Colbert picks who didn't work out and aren't going to be part of the guys that you want to pass the torch down to. And it's going to be about finding those guys. That's going to be the next key here. We get to how they do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Still a lot of questions from you guys to answer. I'm Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. How often do plans get missed because they're buried in a digital calendar or not written down at all? Would seeing your whole week clearly on a 15-inch HD screen help you stay focused and less overwhelmed? Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to continue answering your questions here on the call-in line for the Locked On Steelers podcast. As always, you can call in at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. This one comes from Josh out in Downington, PA, who this was back like shortly after the draft when he asked this question, but it kind of addresses things that I'm going to continue to bring up during this show. Here's Josh.
Hey, Chris. Josh calling from Downingtown, PA. Wanted to get your take on, since the draft has finally come to an end, I personally think that this is one of the best drafts the Steelers have had in a very long time. They stuck to their guns. They knew what they wanted. They didn't overdraft. I mean, looking back at, now where Shador went, if the Steelers would have drafted him in the first round, knowing what we know now, they would have looked like idiots. But I want to get your take and see, if you think that this is one of their best drafts they've had in a long time, and if you think that now Omar Khan has kind of solidified himself as the GM for the Steelers, there leaves no doubt that he is going to be our GM for years to come. He is the next Kevin Colbert. Want to get your take on that. Have a good rest of your day. Also just wanted to say, my boy Will Howard from Downingtown, same town as I'm from, he's going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, and he's going to be a great one. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate you calling in. Again, it's 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Thank you again for your calling in on your question. Okay, we are going to, at some point, I think I might just do a whole Will Howard episode, because a lot of y'all are calling about Will Howard, and the differences in opinions on him are so crazy. But hey, quarterbacks, when you don't have a franchise guy lined up, that's how it is. It's the same thing with Kenny Pickett. Even he was a first-round pick. There's a whole lot of that. We will get to Will Howard sometime. But let's focus on what Josh asked us here. So Josh was talking about, is this draft class the best draft class? Like I say when I grade everything, I need to see how draft classes play out. I still don't even know if 2023 was necessarily a very good draft class. It was very good by my measures as far as where I personally ranked those prospects in the draft. But I acknowledge that when I'm doing that, whenever you guys see me doing my top 100 boards, or anyone doing it, it is simply based off of the criteria that we build, that when we study the game, we're saying, hey, these traits that we see in these players, these look like the things that will translate the best to the NFL. And this is what we think, and this is how we think they compare to other players, and so now we rank them, and it's a whole process. It's why it takes months for me to do. I don't know how some people just have that stuff ready to go all the time, every day. I need time to take it in. I sit with it. I throw darts at a dartboard, not literally, but like literally, I'm in a laboratory just cooking until I figure like this is where I am. And that's kind of how I get there, is just studying just so many things, film, notes, reading other work, and just trying to see more things about guys' characters. All that kind of stuff goes into these decisions. But none of that matters until we see these guys actually play, right? Because guys can surprise us. And that's where I tell people, like, hey, like people say, you don't think Will Howard's going to be that good? I didn't say he thinks he's going to be that good. I just think that he's a 6th-round draft pick, and you should give him the time to be a 6th-round draft pick and develop. I'm just saying that don't put him as Ben Roethlisberger, Josh Allen, Jesus Christ yet. Like, don't do that to him. Let him grow and let him be a young guy that's a 6th-round pick, and there's no pressure on him. That's where I'm coming from there. But again, could he be that guy? Maybe. Now, with this draft class, again, based off of my personal rankings, I had Derrick Harmon as, I think he was my 13th best player on my big board. Let's pull my big board up here. I still have it in my images here. Where did I have him? Derrick Harmon. Yep, 13th best player on my big board. So getting him at 21st was a win in my book. I had Kaleb Johnson. They picked him at 83rd. I believe I had him just outside the top 50. Yes, I had him at 54. So in my book, that was a big win. Jack Sawyer, I believe I had him inside my top 100. Is he? Maybe I didn't. I might be missing him here. But I had Jack Sawyer higher than 123. I know that much. So, but point being, there are. Wait a second. That wasn't the top 100. This is the top 100. Anyway, either way, my point is I had Jack Sawyer higher than that. So based off of my pre-draft rankings, where I personally saw these guys, I think this was a good draft. So Josh, yes. Do I think this was a very good draft? Yes. However, like in 2023, I thought that was an amazing draft. Broderick Jones was a top 10 player, in my opinion, as far as what he could be as a tackle. I thought Joey Porter Jr. was a top 20 player when it came to cornerbacks and how he played out there. I thought Keanu Benton was a late 1st rounder, and they got him in the middle of the 2nd round. I also thought Darnell Washington was a guy that should have been considered in the 2nd round. And so you look at that, that's 4 picks of guys that I thought could be gone long before the Steelers take their 2nd round pick. So like, that to me still, as far as like grading and how I was ranking guys and was just blown away by who the Steelers were able to get in, throughout the draft process, I still say 2023 is there, but we have to see how these guys play out, right? Because like in 2022, when the Steelers got Kenny Pickett, George Pickens, DeMarvin Leal, Calvin Austin, that looked like a good class. It has not panned out that way. Kenny Pickett gone. George Pickens gone. Certainly, George Pickens a bigger talent than Kenny Pickett. DeMarvin Leal's just been injured every year. Calvin Austin still looks promising as a fourth round wide receiver, but Connor Hayward, Mark Robinson, Chris Oladukin, okay. But there's times where certain draft classes do work out. Like, the 2014 draft class, the Steelers picked Ryan Shazier in the 1st round, Stephon Tuitt in the 2nd, Dre Archer, Martavis Bryant in the 4th. Martavis Bryant, for a 4th round pick, even though he flamed himself out of the NFL in a few years, he was a prolific receiver for some years. That's still a good 4th round pick when you even get him for to do what he was able to do. But Tuitt and Shazier, really good talents there. Now, the thing is that, sometimes you pick guys and they don't work out. You look at a lot of people said Devin Bush was the right pick. I thought Devin Bush was the right pick. When I looked at his tape in college, I'm like, that guy looks like he can translate well to the NFL. And for a year and a half, he did. He was playing out of his mind. And then he got hurt, and then he became the Devin Bush that we all know now. And, Deontay Johnson worked for a time as a 3rd round pick, but didn't pan out. So to answer your question, Josh, we got to wait till these guys pan out before we say what is and what isn't a good draft class. Is it one that I think pre-draft wise was getting good value? Absolutely. But before we started, to be honest about Omar Khan, I admire the trade that he pulled off to get Chase Claypool out of the organization and to get the 1st pick of the 2nd round from the Bears. That alone is still one of the craziest things that I've ever seen trade-wise when it comes to draft picks for players. But we still have to see how his drafting process works out. If this front office that he has does pan out, because this is when I start to really grade the 2023 draft class. Like, okay, now we're in the 3rd year of these guys. These guys have had time to develop. Let's see who these guys really are. And if after this year we see, 3 or 4 of those guys being key parts of the team in positive ways, then we can say, that was the good class. But we won't know if this 2025 class is like that, I'd say, for another 2 or 3 years. And that's fine. That's part of the process. But the thing is you want to get back to hitting regularly in the draft and getting the guys that are going to be part of your new nucleus moving forward. Because when you keep doing that year over year over year, you keep building. And then that's how you have a really strong roster that across the board you're confident in, that you don't have a whole lot of issues there. So with that, I want to take one more question here. And then we're going to throw it a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the things that you guys, some of the other questions you guys have had about the future with with Omar Khan. Here's Steve from Bakersfield, California, with a question we kind of took a little bit last week, but I want to just bring it up here. You'll see why. Here's Steve.
Hi, CC. This is Steeler Steve from Bakersfield, California. Love your podcast. Fan for a few years now. Why can't we find our franchise QB? Would it behoove us for the Steelers to tank so we can get our QB on the next year's draft? Tell me what you think. Again, love your show. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Steeler Steve. As always, you can call it at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Steeler Steve, if you were watching and listening last week, you saw me do a whole segment where I talked about tanking, and I don't think the Steelers should do it. But people are probably saying, well, how are you going to get one of those top flight quarterbacks, one of those quarterbacks in that high up draft class? I hear you. But even if you know that, like, if you told me this quarterback is going to be available in this draft class, there's a reason why I still don't think that even in that situation you should tank. You should still always play to be a good team, and you should keep moving forward with that and take the shot on drafting, on trying, if you need to, trading up to go get that guy, but not tanking for the sake of going and getting the guy. We'll answer that question next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, because I got some thoughts here and some history to provide y'all, to provide context to why I think that way. We'll stick it here with the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, your host here, answering your questions. Getting back to Steeler Steve's question about tanking. Now, here's the thing. You can think that you know who that quarterback is and who it's going to be and what you should do for that quarterback. But you don't know until you actually see that quarterback play the year before, right? Like, there's certain guys that I'm very confident about going into next season, that, like, hey, I'm having my eyes on them because I want to see how they play, because they could be the guy that I'm studying the most when I get to my film work heavy on college football in like January, February, March, all those months, getting ready for the combine and getting ready for the draft. But the thing is that if you do that a year out, sometimes you're going to be looking at the wrong guys. And if you commit to a guy way too early, you think that, let's plan on just selling out for this guy. If that guy ends up not being there because they went back to college football for some reason, or they suffered a really bad injury, or they just weren't that good, they got really hot one year and it didn't build from there, then you tanking for nothing is a big mistake. And again, I think tanking in general is just not a good move. It's not what you should do, because that's how you destroy nuclei. That's how you that's how you blow up, positive things that you got going for yourself right now. It's how you get people to not believe in your organization. It's how you become a bad organization in a lot of rights. Now, sometimes you can tank at the very right moment, a very perfect moment, and score big on just who's available. But a lot of times that don't work for teams. I want to harken back to a time when I remember, I have several friends who are Browns fans, and who I remember in, I think it was 2015 it was 2015, I believe, when Cardale Jones stepped in the college football playoffs for Ohio State and lit it up. And I think he won the national championship, and he looked spectacular doing so. And in that short span of games, there was a movement in Cleveland. I remember T-shirts being printed. I remember people talking about all the time, fail for Cardale. It was a whole movement to fail for Cardale. Turned out Cardale Jones was not actually that guy. He kind of paid out. He ended up being a 5th-round pick for the Bills. And that next year, for the 2016 draft, in 2015, they finished 3-13. I believe they either traded back or somehow they ended up with the 15th overall pick. They got Corey Coleman, still wasn't a good player at wide receiver. That guy could barely catch there. So sometimes the guy that you think is the guy, no matter how good you think it is, maybe he's not the guy. And listen, for example, I think that if I'm looking at the class right now, the class that it projects it could be, doesn't mean it even going to be is, because some of these guys are young and could stick in for another year or 2 or 3. But if you had to ask me right now, I like Lenore Sellers out of South Carolina. He's the guy that when I study the tape of and I see the highs and the lows, and I figure, hey, where's he going to be? I think he has the traits that can translate well to the NFL, and you can make something out of that. Now, I think Garrett Nussmeier is really good. I like Cade Klubnik. Arch Manning is, of course, the guy that everyone wants to talk about because he's the next Manning. There's Drew Auer out of Penn State. There's Nico Iamaleava out of UCLA. So there's guys, all around that you could be looking at there. But the bottom line is you still don't know who's actually going to be there. Arch Manning could go back for another year, especially in today's NIL era. Guys can get paid. Guys can be like, you know what? Hey, I'm not going to be the first overall pick, so I'm going to stick around and I'm going to get paid $4 or $5 million by this super institution that wants to win a college football championship, and then I'll come out next year because I'll hopefully be a better prospect by then. So there's there's a whole lot of possibilities that could happen there. Now you still got to plan forward as if to be ready in case, it's like planting your crops. If you plant your crops and the rain comes, you're going to be happy because you were prepared. And I think that's what the Steelers are doing right now is they have put themselves to be prepared in case this does end up being the quarterback year. If Manning, Nussmeier, Sellers, Aller, Klubnik, Iamaleava, if all 6 of those guys are in the draft class, it's a happy day. You're going to be able to pick the one that you really want as long as they're not like the top 2 player picked or whatever like that. But the Steelers have the ammunition to trade up. They have the opportunity there, and it's possible to do that. However, there's also the possibility that Arch Manning goes back for another year of college. Lenore Sellers goes back for another year of college. Maybe Garrett Nussmeier don't look like he's all that. Same for Cade Klubnik. Maybe Drew Aller is your best shot, and you're still not comfortable with him as a deep ball passer. Maybe Nico Iamaleava goes back to college, and all of a sudden you're thinking, wait a minute, this isn't the QB draft class that we promised, and that's where I think the Steelers, if it does happen, I don't think it will. I think that this quarterback class will actually work out. But if it doesn't work out, I think it's possible that you do try to see, hey, who's the best option? Can you get the quarterback? Do you see a franchise quarterback in there? If you don't, you do try to say, all right, how do we maneuver around that? And that was the question that I wanted to get to next year because Matt from New York City asked very much about this. When he called in talking about what happens if the pick isn't the quarterback, isn't the best player available when you're coming around in 2026. Here's Matt from New York City.
Hey there, Chris. This is Matt from New York City. Listen to your show every day. Love it. Just had a question for you. So how sold do you think the front office is on definitely going quarterback in 2026? I know people are waxing crazy about Will Howard and all this other stuff, but in the event that Howard or maybe even Rudolph just had this unexpected balls to the wall amazing year and they feel like they could possibly move forward with one of those guys as their starting quarterback, what are the possibilities they would pivot to, say, a top receiver, top cornerback, using that draft capital to move up? I know it's all circumstantial, but it seems like an intriguing option. Unfortunately, I guess Jeremiah Smith is not going to be eligible for next year, but maybe there's someone else who's on that level that might be worth spending the capital on. Just curious. Thanks again.
Thank you, Matt. As always, call in 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. So let me address this straight up so people understand. If there's not a quarterback that you think that the Steelers think, or like if I'm sitting here and I have the chance to pick who I want to pick, right? And I look at the board and I do not see a franchise quarterback in the draft class. Just like this year, I said, hey, I don't believe in Shedeur Sanders. Like, Josh, when he called in, he said, he grades Omar Khan for not falling into that pit because the Steelers would have looked silly if they took Shedeur Sanders in the first round because he went in the 5th round and clearly other teams didn't value him like that. Now, maybe he works out, but again, you get my point. Draft evaluations, he wasn't that. And that's something that we were saying on this show for a while. I thought he was 4th round, whatever. if you get to 2026 and the list of quarterbacks that I've been going over doesn't pan out, whether they're not good or not available, it's the same policy. You still go after the best players that you can to build the nucleus that you think is going to win you the most games. You do not take stabs at bad players just because you need the position. This was the very fault of the end of the Kevin Colbert era. The Steelers needed a cornerback to complete the late 2010s team. They needed a cornerback, so they had to go get Artie Burns. They needed a safety to complete out the secondary, so they had to go get Terrell Edmonds. Those positions aren't as important at quarterback, but the same lesson can be learned. And that, to me, is the thing that people need to embrace whenever the panic sets in about, you don't have a franchise quarterback. You don't have a franchise quarterback. What are you going to do? You still got to be patient. Now, if you feel like a guy is the guy, go get your guy. I'm not here to say Mason Rudolph or Will Howard or anyone's going to turn into anybody. I'm operating under the plan, under the guys, under the idea that these guys are bridge quarterbacks and that you're still looking for your franchise guy. Until you know that you have your franchise in your office, you're looking for your franchise guy. And if I'm looking at the class and I see, like, if Lenore Sellers is there and I'm the Steelers GM and it's right now and I'm marching up, I'm doing what I got to do to go get that guy. But if he's not, there are still top guys that are going to be there. Every year has superstar players that are going to be available. Like, for example, if you had to look at next year's projected players, we don't know who's going to be there at quarterback or how good everyone's actually going to be. Trust me, I've covered Pitt. I remember guys like Paris Ford and Jalen Twyman being like projected as high first round picks or at least mid first round picks, and them not panning out for different reasons. And so, I've covered guys that have fallen badly in draft classes, all that kind of stuff, that it happens. Will Johnson is a prime example of this year because of his injury. But like on the defensive side, like, Matt brought up, getting a top cornerback. Malik Muhammad out of Texas is a big name that could be there. AJ Harris, the Penn State corner, he's another big name that could be there. There's a safety, Kaleb Downs. Now, there's some people that say Kaleb Downs. I remember all the hype of Nick Eamon-Worry and Malachi Starks. There's type that he could blow both of those guys out of the water. He could be the best defensive player available in this draft class, and he's a safety, so maybe he'll fall a little bit, and maybe he's your new Minka Fitzpatrick for the next however many years. So like there's guys like that on the offensive side of the ball at wide receiver. There's big names out there as well. One guy I really like, and it's funny, I kind of saw him when I was watching my Lenore Sellers tape. It's Nick Harbor, the wide receiver out of South Carolina. This kid is 6'5", 235, so built like DK Metcalf, but younger and actually kind of taller if that measurement is true. And supposedly he runs a 4.2 40-yard dash. What in the world is that? And he looks still raw. He's still young. He was just in his second year, I think, playing college football, and he was still working on his route tree, but he was making good routes. He was making good plays, doing some good toe taps, making contested catches, and he looks like he could be a guy that could be a superstar in the NFL if he puts it all together. And that's it. So there are guys that you're gonna be able to go get. And that's just those two positions. Those are just two positions I looked up when listening to this question and thinking, okay, let me go look at these positions and some guys that I remember when I was just going over tape, like, oh, that name rings a bell, that name rings a bell, and oh, this guy has some good notes here. It's there. It's possible. But yes, if the Steelers if look at this 2026 class, in a year's time or less than a year's time, I guess 8 months time, whatever it is, whenever the season ends and it's time to look at the draft class. If they look at it and they don't see the franchise quarterback available to them, they should not just draft one just to draft one. It's the same argument I had with Dave Damashek a couple weeks ago. You don't just draft a player that you project to be bad because you need the position. That's exactly what they did in the end of the Kevin Colbert era. That got to them to kind of where they are now, where they're missing a gap of years where they could use a strong nucleus of player to help build them towards their future. Instead, you invest in the players that you think that your front office thinks could be the guys, the best players available to build your roster and to make it one of the best in the NFL. Those are the things that you should do, even though you still need a franchise quarterback. And hey, If it's not 2026, then you say, hey, let's go with 2027, and you find a bridge. Mason Rump's under contract for 2 years, and I know Steelers fans are going to be saying, I can't take another year of waiting. I just can't do it. You'd rather take another year of waiting and get some more superstars on your roster than you would committing to a quarterback that you don't like, that you're going to be mad that you took it every second, and then that sets you back even further. And that is why that's why I said this year. Don't take a quarterback just to take a quarterback. Take a quarterback later in the draft where it fits, where the value makes sense. But each step throughout the draft process should be based on where do you evaluate this player, how good do you actually think they are, and what do you see in them do you see them as being part of your future? Do you see them having the qualities to be your franchise guy? And if you do, then you pull the trigger. Then you say, let's go get that guy. But when you don't force it just because you're under the pressure of we need to get one, because that's when you make the biggest mistakes. Those are our questions here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Trust me, we have a lot more on the docket. There's a lot of questions I could have answered in the show, but we're already at 35 minutes. So we're going to call it here, but don't worry. Tomorrow we're going to be back. I'm trying to get Alan Saunders on again. We're going to have a fun show with him here. Keep calling in with your questions at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. And thanks for tuning into this episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social media, same handle everywhere at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. I did a film study on DK Metcalf that maybe we'll dig into a little bit tomorrow about why he can be a better wide receiver one than George Pickens. So check out postgazette.com for that film study, and check me out here every day, Monday through Friday, on the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday episodes. Back here tomorrow with another episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast.